Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Andrew Ferrier, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a way that I've been organizing and managing my files for well over a decade at this point, and a tool that I've built called normfn or normfn, which I use to help me in organizing those files and which might be helpful to you too. Normfn is open source and you're welcome to use it. So I should probably prefix all of this by saying that this is based upon an organizational strategy espoused by this chap called Mark Hurst, who wrote a book called Bit Literacy back in 2007. And there's a variety of strategies and techniques and other tips on how to organize your digital files in there, many of which are still relevant even now, well over a decade and a bit, or in fact almost 2 decades later. But the one that I want to talk to you about today is how you name files, and in particular how you name files with dates in them. So here you can see in this terminal I've got an isolated demonstration environment which I'm going to use to show you some of these things today. And you can see that I've got a variety of files in here, many sort of typical file names that you might come across in any sort of, business or technical or even personal environment. We've got some archive and backup files, some downloads, some photos, some projects, that kind of type of thing. And you can see here there's a variety of date formats, scattered different date formats as part of the file names, as well as, of course, the dates on the files themselves, associated from the file system from the computer. And so, there's a variety of different ways that these dates are kind of sort of scattered around, but they don't really help with organization and they get very confusing, and different people have different ways of putting dates into file names as well. So none of this is very kind of helpful. And so what Mark espoused and what I espouse here as well is a different way of naming your files. And that's specifically to put the file date that's relevant to that file. So that might not actually be the last date that the file was, let's say, for example, modified, but more the date that the file is relevant to. So maybe the time that you started working on this project or this file or this activity at the beginning of the file name, and then the rest of the file name comes later. So what this really means is that, for example, if we were working on this archive file here, rather than calling it archive dash and then this long date, we would write it as year, 4-digit year, and then a 2-digit month, and then a 2-digit day or date, and then the name of the file. And so we would call it 2024-01-15-archive.zip. Now, this isn't very useful in isolation, but if we start doing that for some of the other files in this directory, so let's say, for example, we rename backup like this, so we need to include the actual backup as part of the file name, then you can see this starts to make some sense, right? Because now they're organizing themselves naturally, in the sense that the file date, or the date on the file that's relevant to that file, starts to sort automatically according to the kind of alphanumeric order in the file system. So if, for example, we know that these notes down here, even though the file system says they were created or last modified on the 14th of February 2023, if we know those notes are really from 2022 and specifically January, we might call them 2022-01 notes.txt. And so we've now renamed that file as well. And so you can see that these things start to naturally sort into date order. And this date order is independent of the date order associated with the files themselves on the file system. And so what that means is, as we move them around, so, maybe we email them to others, or we store them on SharePoint or Dropbox or some other kind of file sharing technology, these dates, which often otherwise kind of get lost or confused along the way, are no longer lost and confused, right? Because they're part of the file name themselves. And what's more, if everyone follows this same convention, then what this means is that over time, we end up with these self-organizing directories where a lot of the things that you work with, a lot of your paperwork, your projects, and so on, all have this naturally date sorting kind of mechanism, which is super helpful, at least in my experience. Now, that's great, but of course what we're doing so far is we're actually moving these files around manually. And so that's where normfn comes in, the utility I've created. So let's say, for example, we go into the documents folder, and in here, or documents directory, and in here you can see again a kind of sort of scattered selection of files, the kind of thing you often see where you've got, different dates attached to different types of things. Some of them are written out in full, like this, 15th of March. Other ones are written in this year, month, day format. Some of them are written in day, month, year format. So what we really want is a way of organizing them. And that's where normfn comes in. So if, for example, we take normfn and we type normfn and then this name of this budget file, and we hit return, what will happen is that normfn will automatically detect the date in that budget file using a bunch of heuristics, guesswork in effect, and it will rename that budget file by including the date at the beginning in the same way that I've just been doing, where it's kind of got this year, month, day format. But normfn is smart, right? So it doesn't just look at that one particular year underscore month underscore day format. Instead, it will guess based upon a variety of different heuristics what the date is. So for example, this Q1 report from the 15th of March 2024, if we run normfn on that file, you'll see that again, it gets the date right, 2024 March 15th. You'll see it's removed the date from the rest of the file name and renamed it so it's in this neat organizational pattern. And we can keep doing that for other things. So for example, the notes file down here, now the notes file is in the same format. And if a file is missing a date or time in the file name completely, if we run normfn on that file, it will, in this particular case, take the date and time from the file system. So in this particular case, that's the 10th of March, 2023. So if we run normfn on the project plan, you'll see that that project plan now has that date and time as part of its file name. Except, of course, as part of its file name, again, this now means that if we send that to others, if we email that to people, or whatever, that date and time isn't going to get lost along the way, right? Because it's now considered part of the file name itself. So of course people can rename it, they can change it, right? But again, if folks tend to follow this pattern, then that doesn't happen. This pattern, incidentally, by the way, year, month, day, this is called ISO-8601 for the more geeky amongst us. It is generally considered, the superior date format to use for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is because of its natural sorting ability. So the fact that the way that the dates sort chronologically aligns exactly with the way that most computer systems sort files already alphanumerically, right? Because years and come first and then months and then dates, these will naturally sort into date order without you having to do anything. So that's kind of the basic principle of normfn. It's not much more complicated than that. There's a few other things I want to show you though. One of them is the --dry run flag. So if we run --dry run on normfn and we run that on this contract file, you'll see it doesn't actually move the file, but it shows you what it would have done, right? And so that's useful if you're maybe still a little bit nervous about using normfn, or you're not sure what it's going to do. So if I list the directory here, you'll see that the file is still exactly as it was before. It hasn't actually moved it, but it has told you what it was going to do. So that's one kind of sort of safety feature. The other safety feature that's worth making you aware of, so there's a file that normfn creates called normfn undo.log in this directory local state. And if we take a look at that, you'll see that what this log is in effect is actually a shell script. There's a lot of explanation up here at the top, which I won't go through. These are all comments, but in effect what normfn does is every time it moves the file, it adds the shell script equivalent of a command to this shell script that will effectively undo those changes, right? So if I were to copy and paste this last line here, this move command, and I were to run that, you'll see that effectively what normfn has done is it's undone the last change that it did, right? Although in this particular case, we're not actually invoking normfn, we're invoking move, but it's a move command based upon what normfn has done. So that's kind of another safety feature. Now, of course, even now it's a little tedious to go through and run normfn on each of these files. You can run normfn on multiple files, but it's also worth pointing out you can run normfn recursively on directories as well. So if you look in this photos directory that we have here, for example, you'll see there's a variety of different files with kind of sort of scattered different, date and timestamp types in their file names. Some of them don't even have any. So what we can do is if we change into our home directory, if we run normfn -r for recursive on that photos directory, Okay, so normfn is now finished. If we list, you'll see that first of all, the photos directory has disappeared to be replaced by a photos directory with the date and time in it. Okay, so great. So we're now following that convention even for directories, which again is super useful, right? I've been doing this for many years, and if I prefix, for example, project folders for clients with the date and time, that makes it super easy to kind of go back chronologically and think about what I've done and when, which is very helpful. But if I now go into that photos directory, you'll see that normfn has found all of the files in there and it's prefixed all of them with the date and time. Normfn in general is pretty safe. So what that means is if it can't detect a date and time that follows a pattern that it expects in your file name, it just won't rename the file, or it will add a date and time based upon the file system date and time instead. So in general, running normfn is pretty harmless, but even if you're still a little bit nervous, remember you've kind of got that undo log that we talked about earlier, right? So you'll see it's now filled up that undo log with a whole variety of more things based upon that directory that we just recursively renamed. Normfn has a few other features and flags. I'm not going to show you all of them, but like all well-behaved command line utilities, if you type normfn --help, you'll see that there's all of the command line flags that you can use described there. So that's pretty much all I kind of wanted to show you today about normfn itself. If you're interested in trying out normfn, please go to github.com/andrewferrier/normfn, scroll down to the installation section and kind of follow the instructions there. I will say that at the time of recording this video, normfn's installation mechanism is a little bit dated because it's quite an old tool. We do have pre-built packages for Debian and Ubuntu Linux that you can use, but if you're in any other platform, then typically you'll kind of clone this repository and install it using this make install command. I do have it on my list in relatively short order to improve and update this mechanism sort of for modern Python and installation standards. And so by the time you come to try this out, there's a good chance that this process will have changed and improved. But nevertheless, if you go to github.com/andrewferrier/normfn and follow installation, then you should find the instructions there. The only other thing I'll say is if you have any feedback for normfn, please feel free to go here and open an issue with any bugs or feature requests or other comments you have, or for that matter, if you're so inclined, you feel free to submit pull requests to normfn as well. Hope you found this video useful. Thanks very much for listening and have a great day. Cheers. Bye-bye.